What is going on, YouTube? This is Acid Root. So I'm going to review the third album by Sugar Ray. I reviewed one of their albums recently, which was their Floored album, which had the hit single Fly on there. And I enjoyed reviewing that project, so I wanted to review a larger album by them. This is the one that kind of broke out the most, or one of the ones that broke out the most. This is definitely one that capitalized on the success of Fly from 1997 off Floored, and that this is the album 1459. So the reason why they named it that is because critics had said that they were only going to have their 15 minutes of fame. So they said 1459, they're at their last minute of fame. It was kind of them being sarcastic as if they weren't believe it. It's kind of them being sarcastic about saying this is their last minute left in the spotlight. So this is kind of that aspect. But this is actually a pretty glossy album. Like this one really does kind of have like the same sound. This one kind of does have the same sound as the hit song Fly, which unfortunately, because that was one of the last songs they recorded for Florida, it was just kind of where they didn't realize that that song was going to be a hit because they were still kind of a new metal, kind of punk rockish ska type stuff and that sort of thing. But they realized 2 years later that that was the sort of sound that folks were liking. So they made a number of songs like the song Fly. This is a very malaised kind of summer hotel lounge. It sounds like perfect music for like a hotel lounge in like Florida, Texas, Hawaii, California, especially some of those type places. Just anywhere south of the equator, something like that, those kind of places where it just would be kind of more. I mean, you can tell by the album cover that it's just really summer kind of ready and stuff. I just look after that aspect. It just kind of has a poignant touch of being able to have some of these songs that really have like a commercial edge, but then also are kind of capitalizing on a hit that not every single musician will do. They'll just kind of leave it in some cases at one aspect and not try to go forth with it, but they did it. And the fact of the matter was, is some of these songs are their best songs. Like I feel like Someday and Every Morning are really heavily induced hook kind of songs. It just really worked. And this is definitely one that deserved the success it got. This was all over the radio throughout 1999, 2000 stuff. This was just kind of like an alternative to new metal, where new metal really got popular in 1999. And if Kid Rock and Limp Bizkit and Linkin Park were a little bit too edgy and rough for some of y'all folks, I would have to say that this sort of aspect between Smash Mouth and Sugar Ray, this was just a more glossy and kind of commercial and just overall straightforward. I feel like this sort of stuff, where I feel like new metal was kind of just the more edge to it. I feel like this definitely, I mean, this album, it's not to say that this is completely just soft pop rock and commercial type stuff, but it really does have, this album does have some somewhat edgy kind of rock songs that kind of sound out of place, is because the sound that they established is just, it's really like a dichotomy of two kind of bucking kind of sounds that just don't add up to it, because they're not doing new metal this time, but they're just kind of doing alternative rock that still kind of has like a punk edge to it. I just don't know how well punk suits Sugar Ray. They don't, I mean, I just feel like the band just doesn't come off as a believable punk band because of the sound that they established with Fly and Every Morning and some of these type tunes. But they at least do have a handful of songs on here that are kind of alternative rock related, but it just really doesn't fit them. But so I'm gonna go ahead. So I'm gonna go ahead and talk about the singles. The first single was Every Morning. The first single is Every Morning. This is like a really kind of highlighted acoustic tune. This just has a great beat on here, great instrumentation. This one's just very distinct and probably outdoes Fly. I feel like this one, even if Fly kind of has like the more impact and is more revolutionary, I feel like Every Morning just kind of perfected and glossarized that sound and just made it a lot more glossy and just kind of gave it a lot more commercial sheen towards it. It's definitely like a hazy, late midday kind of tune that's just a perfect kind of day commute kind of tune, not necessarily 6 or 7 o'clock in the evening, but just something like 2:15, 2:45, 3:15, something like that, just midday where the sun's not quite setting, but definitely just like a kind of past like lunchtime kind of tune as far as that kind of goes. And it just kind of has that malaise towards it. There's a lot of songs on this album that do kind of have like a lot of soul and malaise to them. It's very much makeshift tunes, but it just seems to be kind of like a storm cloud kind of over this album, that I feel like songs like RPM and Fly off of Floored were just a lot more energetic and kind of more rambunctious, but a lot of these just kind of have like some sort of storm cloud over them in a lot of ways this time. But I do like the malaise about it. I mean, they do the songs in terms of the production, these singles in terms of the production really give them like a nice kind of day commute kind of malaise, despite the fact that it's kind of like distorted and sullen. I still feel like these are pretty, rompish kind of hop and bop kind of tunes and that sort of thing. The second single, the second single is Someday, and the first single of Every Morning is kind of like a Monday kind of midday commute kind of tune. I feel like Someday would be the Tuesday one. This is like the one that you play the next day, so in case Every Morning's kind of getting played out, you have another tune, because both of these hit extremely hard. Both of these were really kind of all over the radio back in the day, 99, 2000, 2001 and such. So this is like the Tuesday song, where it's definitely still kind of day commute, job commute, blue collar makeshift type stuff, but it just has like that still kind of malaise about it. This one's a little bit more sullen than Every Morning, where Every Morning was at least just kind of like a small glum kind of bop, but this one's really kind of more of just daydreaming, just kind of more of just like a kind of hazy sullenness about it. But it is a nice blue collar jam. I definitely like the instrumentation on this one. It's a great song. Both of these are just a fiery, just complete packs of punch, 1-2 punch on this particular project. Falls Apart is the third single, and this one's another kind of tune just like Every Morning and Someday. It's another kind of sullen, kind of malaise, kind of blue collar kind of one, but this one has a little bit of a rock edge towards it. It's kind of like a mixture of like RPM and Every Morning, I would have to say. It definitely has that kind of edge where they put like the rock oriented stuff where it's not quite just Falls Apart is not quite pop rock oriented this time, but it does kind of have that in the verses. But in like the chorus, it's very much alternative rock. And it is still kind of sullen, but they kind of make it into like a light makeshift power ballad, where it's just kind of a power ballad for like pop rock radio, where a lot of times when folks like Weezer or Green Day or some of those type folks do it, they don't necessarily make like their power ballads like full blown as heavy rock. So this is really a heavy song for being a power ballad. This is really a heavy song for being a power ballad for like pop radio. And I think the thing about this album is this is the kind of album that pop radio stations would pick up. I mean, you can hear Every Morning and Someday on pop radio, but this one kind of falls more into like the rock charts, where it's not quite rock enough for like classic rock and heavy metal and those type stations, but it's also a little bit too heavy for like pop stations and adult contemporary and that type of stuff. But I mean, I give this song an almost song just because it's a little bit clumsy in the chorus. I think this the heavy kind of approach. If it had been toned down a little bit, this could have been the heavy hitting third single, but this one's probably the least effective of the three singles. It's a decent song, and I definitely like the beat in the verses, just a very sullen and just kind of another malaise kind of makeshift one. But I just kind of look after it. I think maybe the rock edge to it was just a little bit kind of heavier, maybe just a notch or two heavier than it needed to be to really get it in the commercial kind of fanfare. Because basically, I feel like Sugar Ray needed these songs. They definitely do. I mean, getting two was definitely a good idea, but I think what really would have pushed them over the edge is having three, just because Fly was the only song that was really being played by them, and that's why they said that they were only having 15 minutes of fame. So they needed three singles, but I give them 2.5. I mean, I like Falls Apart somewhat, but it just didn't quite wholesomely come through. But there's 11 songs on this album if you don't count the intro and the outro. So I'm going to go ahead and recommend those 7 songs. So basically, there's 5 songs I completely recommend and 2 almost songs. So I'll recommend those. So the 5 songs I definitely recommend would be Every Morning, Someday, Ode to the Lonely Hearted, Abracadabra, and Glory. And then the 2 almost songs would be Even Though and Falls Apart. So I already talked about why Falls Apart is an almost song, but Even Though, this is one that tries to capitalize on this new kind of summer hotel lounge kind of glossy kind of feel in a lot of ways with its commercial kind of feels towards it. But it's just kind of a gimmick song, and it just doesn't quite hit. It's not quite as effective as it needs to be. Like, I feel like Sugar Ray was able to establish the point of getting these hit singles, but for some reason, trying to do some of this stuff, it's just kind of patchy a little bit more than it needed to be when trying to get these in the album cuts. Like another song that kind of has that as the Ode to the Lonely Hearted, but there just aren't. I really feel like they should have really tried to hone and siphon into this sound that they did with Every Morning and Someday, and a little bit with Falls Apart, because really they did manage to pull it off, but they didn't feel like pros at it. They did it decently, but they're not like, in terms of like verified bona fide professionals can entirely. And I think that that's just kind of the concept. That's kind of why I felt like the third single didn't quite deliver as much. So if they weren't able to do it with all three of their singles, then of course the album cuts kind of felt like patchy also. But I do at least like Ode to the Lonely Hearted, but it doesn't compare to the singles. It's just kind of a blurry kind of is this kind of a blurry hotel lounge kind of song. And even though it's kind of like that too, these are both kind of sullen, kind of hotel lounge kind of music. They're very summery, but so even though it's an almost song, because I do somewhat enjoy this song, but I kind of feel like it has a learning curve about it. It just does not quite have the capitalized melodies of like the first two singles. And I think like I like this sound, but it just kind of, you can tell the difference with songs like Ode to the Lonely Hearted and Abracadabra between the sheer kind of fiery punch of Every Morning and Someday. And I don't know why that is. Maybe it's just because this sound was still somewhat new, but I kind of look at the aspect. I do like the production, the instrumentation on Ode to the Lonely Hearted, and even though those are basically more songs like the first two, or basically all three of the singles, but they kind of feel like more background music and less kind of focus on listening to the music more so than just kind of worrying about the significant other you're with, or just kind of the more commute of what you're doing throughout the day, more so than paying attention like, hey, I think this is Sugar Ray and that type of stuff, which is really too bad, because when you look at music having the ability to excite you, it just kind of feels like when the emphasis is taken off of that, it just feels like it's some of this almost kind of comes off as forgettable. But I just look after it like the thing that I would have to say is they really had like a nice kind of they really had like a nice niche with these songs like Fly and Every Morning, Someday, and Falls Apart, but they did not completely siphon into it the way that they needed to. And as a result, I do feel like, I know that they kind of followed up this record relatively quickly, but I was kind of surprised that these album cuts that kind of had this same sound as like the singles were just kind of like not mediocre, but just more decent territory, more so than the aspected kind of thing. Because I was looking for like some kind of, I mean, this is a very sullen album, but I was kind of expecting like some real kind of summer hotel lounge kind of tunes that would just have some rampant kind of energy, that this would be, solid and just exuberant kind of dance club bops that could really have like could just have like an out of nowhere kind of hit potential that could just be like beef up this album, kind of give that, but they just kind of come off as more tame and refrained and just kind of more distracted or something. I think that's just kind of the thing. So it's just kind of the concept, but they are like Ode to the Lonely Hearted is at least good, but it's just not as good as Every Morning and Someday. And then even though is kind of the one I'm panning that critique towards, just because it just feels like this is in the same sound as what they were supposed that they were honing, but it just didn't come off as like electric enough. But then to talk about some of these other ones, like Glory is kind of like another rock type tune on here. This one's kind of Glory is kind of a balmy summer and beach kind of tune. This one's kind of jivey, and this has a lot more energy towards it. This is the sort of stuff that kind of breaks away from like the more malaise that most of this album's kind of had. But I do kind of like this. This is the sort of stuff. I like the direction of Glory, but there's not enough songs like this. This is definitely kind of where I do like this kind of in the edge that it has, but this is more alternative rock. And it's kind of like an in-between gesture between like the kind of malaise type sound of like Every Morning and Someday, but then also some of their old style from like Floored with songs like RPM and some of those hits off that album, the more rock related ones. So they do kind of still have that sound, but this is very summer and beach music kind of feel towards it. So I do like that direction, but I could have used another song like this. That's really kind of the concept. Another song like Glory would have definitely been great. And then another hit on here, the fifth song that I want to talk about is Abracadabra, and this one's a Steve Miller Band cover. And this one really feels like it came out of the 80s. This one just has like a lot of dance club oriented type vibes towards it. This one really feels like a rock song that you would hear at like a dance club or something like that. This really has like that. So Abracadabra is like a Steve Miller Band cover, and this one really feels ripped out of the 80s as far as that kind of goes. It's a nice mid-tempo kind of club and dance bop. It's a lot different from the rest of the entire album. This one sticks out like a sore thumb, and that makes sense because it's a cover song, but I just kind of look after it. Like this is another type direction that I would have liked definitely for like Sugar Ray to have had a little bit more of on here. I mean, I know that it's a cover song, but I would have liked another dance club bop. That's definitely something that this album could have used, is some dance club type numbers and that type of stuff. This is something to kind of make you get up and jive a little bit and have some of that. That's definitely something. I mean, the aim of this album was kind of a lot more of this makeshift kind of like sullen kind of atmosphere in a lot of ways, and it worked. I mean, it definitely nailed it more effectively than what was anticipated, but it wasn't a wholesome victory, and some of the other sounds that kind of wound up happening in the meantime just didn't come off nearly as well. But Abracadabra is an example of one that was excellent. This is definitely a jivey kind of cover song that worked extremely well. It had like some good mid-tempo dance bops, which is definitely good because rock music is not always dance club music. So to talk about the complaints on this album, I feel like some of these, like Personal Space Invader, Live and Direct, Burning Dog, and Aim for Me, a lot of these just really had some terrible kind of rock beats on here. Like a lot of those four songs that I listed just did not have like the sound they needed. They sound very dry and empty and compared to the sound that they were trying to give off. And I feel like it seemed like Sugar Ray was kind of left in like an empty kind of atmosphere just because they had a sound, but their first two albums did not really chart that heavily, with the exception of their one hit wonder, their one hit from their career, which was just Fly. So basically, by their third album, the fact that up to that point they had only had one hit, it was kind of like, well, what do they do with it? That's at least the expression that I got from it, is just trying to say that they kind of had a mismatch of kind of trying to find a sound that would also be something, so it wasn't just like songs like Fly is the only thing they could. It wasn't just like songs like Fly was the only thing that they could do. But the problem with that is just I could not find something else on this project besides the songs, the kind of summery hotel lounge type music, blue collar malaise type songs like Fly and Every Morning, and some of those. They didn't really manage on this album, at least, to establish something else that they could do. Now, they did pull off a decent cover, pretty solid cover with Abracadabra, but apart from cover songs and like these summer kind of malaise kind of makeshift songs, there wasn't really a lot of things topically to talk about with Sugar Ray. So they at least had a sound, but they were kind of subjected to this one topic, and that's kind of what I saw. They tried, but it just didn't work that well. So that's just kind of the concept about it. But like I said, even the sound that they had managed to hone was kind of not necessarily dicey and patchy, but it just was not wholesome a victory. Like I'd give it maybe like a 6.75/7 in terms of the execution with their sweet spot that they were trying to get to. They did it with 2.5 singles, but that's just kind of the thing about it. So, but me liking 5 songs out of 11 plus 2 almost songs, I'm gonna go ahead and say that this album to me is like a 6.5 out of 10. I think that that's relatively solid. I mean, I know me liking 7 songs out of 11 would seem a lot better, but it's really just 2 almost songs I'm kind of on the fence about. So it's decent, it's above average, but it's not a classic just because the angles, they just didn't have the gigantic enough versatility to really be able to make like a classic album. Though they definitely had some bops, they definitely had some good songs, and the sweet spot that they did have was better than expected, and they didn't burn out in 15 minutes of fame, but maybe it was 45 minutes of fame. So that's just kind of the concept where I just look after they managed to dodge being a one hit, one album wonder, but for some reason, it just felt like the style just was not quite perfected enough in terms of what probably would have been The sound that they attempted was good, but it just did not quite have the finesse that I would have thought that probably should have been necessary to kind of get these guys further stable in their career. So it really felt like by the end of this album's run, they had like 3.5 total hits, which would have been Fly from their 97 album, Every Morning, Someday, and then a half kind of song would be Falls Apart. But that's still, 3 albums in to only have 4 hits is still relatively light. So that's just for you to judge as far as what you think of that. But that's this kind of thing. So 6.5 out of 10. The social score, I think about a 6 out of 10 would be sufficient because it does have 2 large smash hits, and depending upon who you talk to, maybe some of these folks might like the third single, Falls Apart, also. But I just kind of feel like it's not overly abundant. Like, I did like Floored pretty well. That one had a lot more jivey energy and just rough kind of new metal type sound, which was actually a good angle for them. It's too bad that they didn't try to do anything new metal here, but the alternative rock, the leftover spare rock tracks just really didn't work, and they just couldn't find any other cards to play apart from the trick that they learned with Fly and stuff. So that's this kind of thing. So the social score, I do feel like Abracadabra is a nice dance bop, and Glory was kind of a decent surprise also, but there's just not enough of like those kind of moments. So it gets a 6. It's kind of above average, but it's not like an entire all month kind of victory and that type of stuff. It just doesn't have the steam of that. But so in terms of the future, I'm not really sure what Sugar Ray's been up to. That's kind of a question mark for me. I know that they at least dropped an album in like 2001 and a couple more, so I'm going to review a few more of these. I do want to get to more Sugar Ray, but that's kind of the aspect of some of what I thought of this project. Pretty decent and solid here.